All right, guys, we're back with another episode of the Restaurant. Today we've got Benjamin Rothrock, and he is in North Carolina. He is Sambo and Judoka. He runs a lot of competitions, and Benjamin, thank you for being on the show.
Absolutely.
So we recently had an episode, and you wanted to kind of delve a little further into Sambo in the United States, and I would love to hear a little bit more, clarification on the rules as far as like what Sambo is, combat. I think you ran the Combat Jujitsu thing that was here in North Carolina not too long ago, just a couple weeks ago. And so if you could kind of like let everybody know a little bit more in depth about the rules and maybe kind of how you got your start in all of it.
So I started martial arts when I was 7. And I was living in Atlanta with my family, and my first journey into martial arts was actually through boxing. So Evander Holyfield was hot, and he was from Atlanta, and because that's how old I am. Evander Holyfield was the unified champ at the time. So and when we moved to North Carolina, boxing was not as readily available in like the Winston-Salem area at that time. And so I started to get into the what you would consider more traditional martial arts, Kung Fu, Kempo, Arnis, these things. But where I really found my home as a martial artist was when I got exposed to the Modern Army Combatives Program, which is based on, originally it was based on Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, when I went through basic training in 2001. And that's a key point of this, because in the combatives manual, when they kind of discuss the history of combatives, the Ranger Battalion initially wanted to base our Modern Army Combatives Program on Sambo. But at the time, there were not enough instructors to implement it, because the Berlin Wall had just fallen, and they were not readily available to teach the military. But UFC 1 had happened, and the Gracies were in our backyard, so Gracie Jiu-Jitsu became the foundational style for the original Modern Army Combatives Program. And as MACP has developed, modern MACP, especially when you go through basic, tactical, and then master trainer, more closely resembles military Sambo at this point than it does Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, even though like most of your foundational, like the basic combatives, is a lot of ground fighting. So it was MACP that inspired me to pursue grappling arts. And I eventually found my way to, kind of simultaneously, I was training with a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt back when blue belts ran everything. Like all your instructors were blue belts back then. If you saw a purple belt, that was like, that was like royalty. If you saw a brown belt, he was probably from Brazil. And if you saw a black belt, he probably didn't speak English back then. So, but I was training with that blue belt. And then I discovered American Combat Jujitsu, Professor Tony Maynard, and that is the instructor that Chet and I have in common, who was with your previous episode. So American Combat Jiu-Jitsu is like you're like a generalist with that system, because you have basic components of striking, basic components of throws, basic components of grappling, and basics of self-defense that are core native to that system. And what kind of happens with a lot of Professor Maynard's affiliates is that they go on and they end up specializing in a lot of things. A lot of Professor Maynard black belts have strong ties to Isshin-ryu karate. And I was unique in that, the part of what drew me to the system was that, he was a prior service Marine, Navy hand-to-hand combat instructor. And that was a big influence on like the tone and timbre of his system. And what I loved was the wrestling components. So my initial secondary art became Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I have gone on, I've got my first degree instructor black belt under Joe Moreira International Francesco Mansour lineage. And so I have a pretty intense background there. Started pursuing judo, and because I love the throws, I think that when you get a big judo throw, it's a thing of beauty. And started pursuing that, got really deep into judo competition. I loved how aggressive judo competition is, just with the stalling penalties and everything. It's just fierce. And it was through judo that I met my coach, Leonid Yefimov, who was from former Soviet Union, is an American citizen now. And he had been a master of sport in both judo and sambo in former Soviet Union. That was actually how he got to go to college. To excel in the old Soviet Union, you either had to be a super athlete or you had to be a super genius. And he was super smart. He was super smart, but it was his athleticism through sambo that got him into eventually what became a master's in mechanical engineering. And that's what he does here in the United States. Is he's like a quality assurance type engineer for a company that makes fuel pumps. So when I started talking to him about sambo, I said, okay, well, how do I earn rank in sambo? Like, how do you belt up in sambo? And he said, there's no belts. There's no belts in sambo. There's only fights. And that was a different concept for me, because with judo you have the ranking system. With Brazilian jiu-jitsu you have the ranking system. And I could not wrap my head around the fact that, like, with sambo you are wearing red or you're wearing blue for scoring purposes in the match. There is a master of sport status, which we can discuss a little bit later, but for all intents and purposes there's no belt levels. And I said, okay, well let's do sambo. And he says, you're doing sambo. You box, we box. You leg lock, we leg lock. You make wrestle, we make wrestle. And the only difference is gi. Only difference is gi. In sambo we call the jacket the kurtka, and it fits a little different. It's got the shoulder cuffs from Mongolian wrestling. The belt threads through the uniform as opposed to just wrapping around it like a martial arts belt. So what I was pursuing judo full tilt, was doing a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, doing a lot of the old ISJA sport jiu-jitsu a la Ernie Boggs, whom you all are familiar with. And did my first world championship was an ISJ world championship in 2010 for sport jiu-jitsu. But it wasn't until someone brought the Our Dojo Sambo League event to Wilson, North Carolina. I found out that it was happening, and that was like it was the first time a state championship was ever held here, and it was small. But there were some crazy athletes there, like people that had been pro MMA fighters. There was a guy there that in my weight class that had been on the All-American freestyle wrestling team. Like, these are the kind of people that turn up for sambo events.
And we had talked a little bit before, and you had kind of said that sambo was still, at a time when Brazilian jiu-jitsu was kind of starting to grow, sambo was still kind of held close to the chest by those guys who were training it.
Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because of that lack of belt system, and because of the lack of accessible competitions in this part of the world. It was really easy for like charlatans to turn up that had no background. I guess they ordered a kurtka off of eBay or whatever, and they say, I'm a sambo guy. And we knew just enough about it because of guys like Oleg Taktarov and Gokor Shavichian, the Team Hayastan, that people are like, oh, sambo, that's MMA applicable. I can go learn from this guy and do UFC. So because of people like that, the sambo community was really reluctant to open itself up to outsiders in the United States. Because sambo is competition. Without competition, you don't have sambo.
And that's a pretty fair assessment, because there for a while, the jiu-jitsu community had its problem with its charlatans. Not so much anymore, but it seemed like, man, for about a 3 or 4 year period, there was a new fake black belt getting outed every few weeks or so, or somebody would roll into an academy and they would be like, "Hey, I'm here to train for a little while with this black belt, and it just doesn't feel right."
I recall we had schools like that, like around here, and like as when we first opened Octagon MMA back in 2009, one of the things that I realized very quickly was how important it was to establish the legitimacy of the school and the program. So like I had not been back from Iraq and out of college for very long. Like I was, my resume was nowhere near as locked in as it is now. So it's like that was like almost an obsessive scramble to make sure that like all of our paperwork was right, and like all of our lineage and legitimacy was correct for that reason. Because you know, if there was a competitive gym down the road from yours, the first thing they would do is they'd pick on your lineage. You know, are you who you say you are? And if your lineage was good, the next thing that they would pick on is your competition resume. Well, if you've got the wins or you're consistently doing well, even in local tournaments, and that was a big thing for me in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I was competing once or twice a month in all the U.S. grappling things, Hayasan, Naga, Good Fight, like all that stuff. Did the World Bud Cup when it was still a thing, to try to establish that I am who I say I am. And if you have those things, then the last thing is like, well, how are your students performing? And if your students are doing good, well, now they just kind of have to tolerate your existence. That was the formula 10 years ago. Nowadays, it's like if you check all of those boxes, well, they will find a cancel culture type reason to get people to leave your school for theirs. So yeah, I'm totally tracking. And like with Sambo, I think it was worse because it was like so hard to it was so hard to fact check people. And like a lot of the websites from Europe are still in Russian. It's only been in recent years that like Fios like has an English version of their website. And the rule books even the English translations are still kind of hard to read because Russian doesn't translate very cleanly to English is what I'm finding. So that was kind of my journey. I did the state championship. I won that. And so we had the idea of like, well, what do we do to bring Sambo to this area? Because there was me with my coach, there was the Wilson Club, and there was a group in Roanoke. And so the idea of the Southeastern Sambo Association started getting floated. And that has fully materialized. We're a 501c. Like I am the sanctioning authority for pretty much anything in this part of the country. And I have the endorsement of both USA Sambo, which is the current national governing body that handles our US team, as well as the All-American Sambo Federation, which is the historical governing body. Like their executive board is like all guys that are like Masters of Sport International class, all Sambo 70 graduates, ex-Russian military. And I'm on their board of advisors actually as well. So we're at this point, like we now are running tournaments, and there's more Sambo in this area than ever before. And we even hosted the national championship that fielded the team. And we took first overall in Sport Sambo at the Pan Americans and second overall as a team in Combat Sambo in the Pan Americans this year. So we've had some success.
If somebody is listening to this now, like, and they're like, man, like, I want to get involved in that, can they just contact you directly to have a tournament or get sanctioned through you, or how does that work, or is that a possibility?
There's a little more to it than that. Like there's conversations that need to be had because they need to understand what it is that they're getting into and how it's different. As you gentlemen are, I'm sure, are aware, within the grappling world, there's hard styles and there's soft styles. And, catch wrestling, judo, sambo, these are hard styles. Brazilian jiu-jitsu, especially modern Brazilian IBJJF Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is definitely soft style, and it's very more club mindset oriented. So if they think that that's what Sambo is, that there's going to be a very rude awakening. And so a lot of BJJ athletes see Sambo and they're like, I don't want to do that. Even sport Sambo, where there's no striking, they see people getting launched with some of these throws or how fast and hard those leg locks come on, and it's not something they want any part of. You tell them they're like, well, I'm just a white belt. How do I get involved? Like, well, Sambo, there's only weight class. So what you're about to do is truly step into open waters, and you're about to find out where you really stand in the world. And like BJJ does not, at BJJ as a culture does not like that. So having an understanding of that, you're making a shift from the club mindset that is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to an Olympic mindset, where we are trying to create athletes to create the best U.S. team possible to rack up as many medals as we can on the international stage. Like, that is a different planet,
Yeah, I think it is too. And I would say, in fairness, I mean, there's some people that's not their interest either, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, not to trash those guys, but it wouldn't be so much like if I was looking at it, like, man, I don't know if that's something we've had some people compete in it too, but I don't know if that would be my mindset too. If I'm like, well, it's not a track that I'd probably go down for whatever reason, if that makes sense.
It does. And for those people, there's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah. So, well, even that sports jiu-jitsu stuff here, like you mentioned, ISJ, like, there's no interest. Not because I can't do it. I'm just like, I just don't. The whole thing, just, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not a picture that I want to paint for myself. Doesn't mean that we don't do that per se. But I think, and I'm agreeing with you, I'm saying there's a point, because like a lot of times, especially like you mentioned, in modern jiu-jitsu now, there's a lot of hobbyists, right? That means they just kind of want to work out and go home. Yeah.
Man buns and Instagram account and gi collection, perfectly taped fingertips, and
yeah, I think things are different, and that's it again. It's a different mindset, I think. Like
it is. And when I started, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was synonymous with Vale Tudo no holds barred fighting. Mm-hmm. Like, there was no difference. BJJ was this. BJJ is where the tough guys went, and BJJ was done, like, we were borrowing mat space in the karate mop closet, at odd hours, because that was all we could afford, and it was very different. And of course, my introduction to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was through modern Army Combatives, which is a whole other mindset. And so as time has gone on and MMA went this way and BJJ went this way, I found that there was less and less of a place for people like me in modern Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so I have, as that culture has shifted, I have retreated deeper and deeper into the harder styles, just because it's where I fit in. Even sport jiu-jitsu is not what it used to be. With when I was competing with sport jiu-jitsu under the old ISJA, if like this was the MMA line, we were getting as close to it as we could without crossing over into the realm of the boxing authority and them hijacking our sport. And now they took out leg kicks. Like, if you actually touch a person with a kick to the head, it's an excessive force penalty, where if you just blow the air off of them, you get 2 points. Yay, go you. And one of the things that caused me to split from the modern sport jiu-jitsu, JiuJitsu world, was that they, as hard as I worked to try to revive it within my part of the country and to participate with the international scene, the direction it was going to try to make it more palatable to karate guys was not something that I could sell to the MMA demographic. You guys still there? I think we're frozen.
No, I'm good. I'm here.
Okay. So I had actually had a big blow up with one of the one of the big regional organizations that masquerades as a national organization. And because they were changing rules and taking stuff out and like really kind of marginalizing like the old school athletes like myself. And I was like, that's it. I'm done. I don't want anything else to do with it. I've got other places I can go. And it was at that time that the Combat Jujitsu International Federation, who I've met their president, Nikolai, had approached Professor Maynard about establishing like a true North American Combat Jujitsu Federation and trying to get a U.S. team fielded here. And so Combat Jujitsu, Combat JiuJitsu, not to be mistaken for JIU-Jitsu, which is the Eddie Bravo stuff, like the open hand pancrase stuff.
Right.
Combat Jujitsu is full contact.
And so, what would a match consist of? It starts standing, and
Start
it's
standing.
Just
both athletes, full gi. They have MMA gloves. They have like the thin grappling style shin guards, and you can score a win with either a submission, or if you are able to discombobulate your opponent with strikes to the point that the referee feels like they cannot safely continue, whether that's they can't answer a 10 count, or if they cease to defend themselves intelligently. So it's similar to MMA. Elbow strikes are not allowed, and with combat sambo, the headbutt is allowed. Combat jiu-jitsu, it's not. And I saw where you guys had discussed what we called the gift wrap rule, where you wrap a guy up, throw the full 5 full amplitude punches beside the head. In international competition, that is when if you have like a guy stretched out on his stomach.
Because so like have the back.
Right, because you're not allowed
to in and you flatten him out.
Fine.
Gotcha. But in the United States, it's just the gift wrap.
Right. If he were face up, you can hit him.
Right.
Not allowed. It's just like we're not allowed to hit here. So they call it simulated shock, because it's still very much geared towards that military mindset of like this is a battlefield art. I was presented with, we had to, the biggest issue was like there was the boxing authorities, and like how do you work around the boxing authorities, with it being full contact, and that varies state by state. We have a national governing body as well as an international governing body. So and a lot of it has to do with like alcohol sales and price of tickets and these kind of things.
Well, I think, anytime a government agency gets in on something, it's always about what they can make on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's always about how they can make some money off of this sport. It has nothing to do, in my opinion. I've never seen an athletic commission. There are people on athletic commissions that will do what they can to help the sport. But for the most part, the reason it's designed is to somehow extract money out of the thing that people are doing, usually for fun.
Right. And we're nonprofit. We're set up as we are a 501c nonprofit organization. I did that very much on purpose. Whenever there's money involved, the egos are soon to follow.
Yeah.
And the ego will get in the way of the art, and that was one of the things that I found in sport jiu-jitsu. It's one of the things that is a problem within Brazilian jiu-jitsu, really any sport. But I find that with the harder contact stuff, it's a little harder to be that way, because it's like it's so much more results driven.
Yes.
In the old days, the 70s and 80s, that black belt that you got from God knows where was enough. This was enough. That's all you needed. And you'd have a school and you'd have students, and it was assumed that because you have this, that you're a certifiable badass, and no one picked at that. and then UFC happened. And now that's not enough anymore. Like, what have you done to back it up? You know, we now have a platform where we can find out if your stuff really works or not. You know, but with sports like Sambo, you know, we have our problems with egos, and you know, the historical national body and the national governing body don't get along. They don't like each other. And it's me stuck in the middle, like between two parents that won't speak, you know. But I'm like, there's not enough of us for us to fight, guys. We got to find a way to make this work. But
so going back to the match, a combat jiu-jitsu match, is it timed? Are there rounds? What is the time like?
It is one round.
One round.
And how long the round is, for adults, it's typically 4 minutes. For youth, it's less. It's like 3. So if no one achieves a win condition, there are lesser scores. So for example, like if I throw a person and immediately land in a pinning position and hold that for 3 seconds, I would score like in judo they would call it a wazari. Or if I knock a guy down, that would be treated the same way as a wazari. So if I've done that at some point in the match, like that may be the deciding factor at the end of the match. There is a golden score, which is like a first positive action win. So it's like if you get a real stiff teep kick and kind of knock the guy back about a foot, then you just won. Or if you get a crappy ankle pick and he falls to his butt and golden score, you just won. They want you off the mat. The longer you're on the mat, the more likely you are to incur an injury. So a big difference between combat jiu-jitsu and combat sambo, other than the presence of pants, is that combat jiu-jitsu, the ground time goes on more like BJJ. So if you don't want to be there, you either have to fight your way back to your feet, or the match has to somehow go out of bounds. Combat sambo is a lot more like judo, in that if you cease to make effective progress, and that your window of time is small, so you need to be ripping a sub or flipping them over for a pin pretty quick. If you cease to make effective progress, they're going to start you back from standing, and that's
similar. That's similar to judo, where you have a limited amount of time to finish.
Yes, and that sambo has more in common with judo than it does. Sambo, I mean, is essentially like judo and wrestling mixed into one sport, is the best way to describe it. So it's the jacket of wrestling, or excuse me, the jacket of judo and all the judo throws and submission like judo has, and like osakomi, like the pinning position like judo has, but it has like the leg locks, and it has like all the freestyle, folk style stuff, like with the singles, the doubles, the fireman's carries, that Olympic judo currently does not allow. So Sambo is a great place, like for wrestlers that want to maintain that same tone and pace, but their scholastic wrestling career is over because they're done. Sambo is a good place for them to go to continue to be competitive.
Well, and that kind of brings me up to something that, because I really like judo. I haven't trained nearly as much judo as I want to, but the times I've trained it, I've loved it. I love the throws. And anytime I get a chance, like, especially when I was a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, I was always drilling like Sotogari is still one of my favorite techniques, starting from standing, but Sotogaris and, essentially just all of judo I love. But I never understood why they took the leg attacks. Like you can't grab the legs. And I never understood that. Do you feel that limits judo? And that is something that is off-putting to guys?
So I have a prepared statement in response to that question, because I get asked that a lot. So the reason that the International Judo Federation set forth was that they had to create greater separation from judo and wrestling to maintain judo's Olympic status. That was essentially it. So And there are even people that will go so far to say is that banning the leg attacks was to preserve the purity of judo, which I think is garbage. No judoka wants weapons taken away. And all of those leg attacks are still a part of classic judo. So, you know, to the IJF, I would say you guys taking leg attacks out is saying that you know Kano's system better than he did, and you know better than Kano than he did, you know better than Kano did, and that's just disrespectful and shame on you. So I think one of the things that it seems like every time judo is about to take a turn to resurge in the United States, because our judo is easily 30 to 40 years behind the power curve of our European counterparts. And I have worked with those guys. And I've been blessed and fortunate to work with a lot of international judo players. My judo coach was on the British Army and British National Judo team, and you know, British national champion, medalist at the European Open, like top notch player. And it's a whole other planet. And it seems like every time we start to get that resurgence in the U.S. because of the Ronda Rouseys and the Travis Stevens and the Kayla Harrisons, the IJF does something else that might as well blow out both kneecaps on purpose. Banning the leg grabs. That was a bad one. Most recently, anyone that if you are trying to be on your national team and go Olympic and they find out that you've been competing in some other related sport like wrestling, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like Sambo,
or even MMA too, right?
And even MMA, close enough related, that it's like that inhibits, they put like a ban, albeit temporary, on your ability to accrue points towards Olympic acceptance. We had a guy fly out from Washington State that had been, he was like number 6 on the ladder or something crazy like that. Insanely talented, over 100 kilo player. And cleaned out his division at Sambo Nationals, went down to the Pan Ams and got gold in both sport and combat Sambo. And now his ability to get on the Judo Olympic ladder because of his participation at Pan Ams has set him back. So it's like, judo is a great art. It's a great sport. I mean, like I hold a second black in judo. I did the national championships this year for masters. And I may be doing the President's Cup. We'll see. But it's like, I will never aspire to go beyond the national level, even with like the veterans team, because it would inhibit my ability to participate in other stuff. I would have to stop doing Sambo. I would have to stop coaching Combat Jujitsu and trying to get that team going. We have fielded a national team. As soon as Combat Jujitsu International Federation posts the schedule for 2022, we will be taking the first ever national team to the Pan Ams, which last time they were held in Mexico. So that's what we got a quick question
for you. Somebody on Instagram just asked, and I just want to make sure I'm probably going to screw it up because it got disappeared. But she was saying that Sambo is obviously a beautiful sport, but it's particularly male dominated, and she wanted to know: are more women getting involved, or is there a push for that? And again, if I put the question, I apologize. It kind of got deleted.
That's a good question, because prior to 2022, there was no women's combat Sambo outside of the United States. We were the only country that was doing women's combat Sambo exhibitions.
I didn't know that. That's odd.
Women, yes, women were only doing sport Sambo, and there were no women's divisions at the Master Worlds. In 2022, that has changed.
Nice.
So for this coming year, FIAS announced women's combat Sambo, and there will be women's divisions at Master Worlds. So it's opening up to other than just junior cadet, senior sports Sambo. And within the U.S., that's one of the things that I'm like strongly pushing, is trying to get crossover from like you know, female athletes that felt like they didn't get the shake they deserved in like wrestling, female athletes that are wanting to cross over in MMA and need like a segue, or they need to step down from MMA to keep the ring rust off. This is available to them. So, you know, the divisions are small, but they're there. And this year, this one that we did in September, I was able to have an over 140 and an under 140 division for women's. And we were very, very proud of that. And we will have two female athletes in the U.S. team that for Combat Jujitsu, like we discussed, there's a ton of crossover between Combat Jujitsu and Combat Sambo. We will have 2 female athletes that go with us to the Pan Americans once it's calendared, and very, very proud of that.
Now, are they on the international scene? Which countries are jumping on faster than the others as far as getting more women involved? Have you noticed, or is it
our side of the world?
Yeah, definitely. Okay,
North and South America.
Really, like, I don't know how to say it, but just I guess just maybe they don't look at women the same or something. I mean, that's not what I mean either, but
I mean, the sport Sambo athletes have been there all along. I think that it may have just been like it may have been a cultural mindset that's hard to say, but you know, in America, we just kind of do what we want. And we didn't see any reason why not to have women's combat Sambo, so we just did it.
I mean, if you kind of compare it to like Olympic soccer, right? It's the females that have kind of pushed it for even the males, right? Because internationally, there wasn't a lot of females doing soccer, right?
And then our only Olympic gold medalist for judo is female, Kayla Harrison. Yeah, that is the only American Olympic judo gold medalist in our history, and she has 2. And we're very proud of her as a discipline. She won the PFL Grand Prix and is on track to win the 2nd PFL Grand Prix for MMA.
Yeah, she's an amazing just athlete in general, but as far as like, you know, showing the power of judo, I thought she's been amazing. The crossover from that to MMA, she's looked great in all of her fights so far, and I'm excited to see what she's going to do. Obviously, her judo career is done, though. Most likely, at least international judo career is pretty much done.
It is. She's tried to be an ambassador for the sport, but you know, as we were kind of previously discussing, it's like they are so stingy about crossing over and cross-pollinating other styles that, like, I don't feel like that USA Judo has done enough to embrace her.
Yeah, well, it's the crazy thing, you know, like, I think more people are probably interested in wrestling now because of MMA.
Yes.
I don't think it has hindered at all. What if anything, it's definitely amped up the interest, the participation in wrestling, at least in the United States. Of people I know guys who put their kids. When I was in Ohio, I was helping teach the elementary wrestling program, and I know guys that entered their kids into wrestling because they watched UFC. And they was like, I would have done it in high school, but I didn't want to wear a singlet. But now I see how important it is. And I want my kid, you know, I don't want my kid to not have these skills. And it's like, well, I don't understand. I guess and like you said, I know that they're trying to do their own thing and they want to separate themselves because of the Olympics, but wrestling's an Olympic sport. I don't understand why they're not embracing it. When you had Ronda in there and you have Kyla in there now, it just seems like you would, if I was judo, I would want to try and piggyback off of some of
that. Probably going to turn myself into a pariah here, but I don't care. A lot of these guys that are in the administration. So within judo, there's 2 tracks to getting rank. Okay. So there's guys like me, we're fighters. So to earn rank in judo, you have to acquire points. Like I actually have this is what a Shiai record sheet looks like. It's your competition record. And you you earn points by winning matches, and then there are certain tournaments that are also ranked tournaments that medaling in those tournaments, in addition to your individual match wins, get you points towards ranking. That's the fastest way to work your way up, right? Is to win matches. But within judo, there is a mechanism for people that are not fighters that they earn their way up by doing katas, getting kata certified. They become referees. They become tournament directors. They become officials, like an administrator. Now, it takes longer, but it's there. And you can kind of always tell how a person got their rank, because typically speaking, fighters become coaches. Kata nerds become referees. And that's why there's the schism, like judo notoriously hates its referees. And that, I believe that that's kind of why. And so a lot of your guys that end up at the highest levels of administration within some of these organizations, they do not have the same fighter competition background that people like Travis Stevens, Kayla Harrison, and Ronda Rousey have. And that so there's a disconnect. So they think that they're preserving a cultural tradition, that they're they're encapsulating what they perceive judo to be by doing this. And it's like, and they're just notoriously bad. And like that, like, you know, this type, they exist in all styles. They exist within jiu-jitsu, within the sport jiu-jitsu, like non-Brazilian jiu-jitsu world, that like most of your administrators are like this. And it's one of the reasons why like we don't get along, and I had to exit that world. Is that they're administrators, they're very out of touch with the athlete, they're very out of touch with what it's going to take to bring their art to the next generation, and they hamstring people like me that are on the ground trying to make it grow.
Someone asked you, what does a judo kata look like? Because that sounds absurd to me.
It's so like the one that everybody has to learn is eventually, like I've done it, is a Noggin Okada, which is like your throwing katas. So you have two athletes that one is uki, the person receiving the technique, and the other is tori.
Yeah.
And there you go. It's 3 steps. So 1, 2, 3, they lock up, and then they execute all the techniques in that set. So tori will execute Seotoshi, Seonagi, and Kataguruma. And then they'll like back up, fix themselves, and they'll go into the next set. And the next set would be like Ukigoshi, Haraigoshi, and Uchimata. And so it's like, it's a demonstration, a very pure technical demonstration of the various techniques on that board. So Noggin Okada is the throwing, it's not all the throwing techniques, but it's considered the main throwing techniques, right? And then you have like a Newaza Okada, that's your mat work techniques. There's a Goshin Okada, which is your self-defense. One of the last katas that Kano was working on prior to his passing, he was starting to work with the Okinawans in integrating an Atamiwaza Okada, which is like a striking kata, like a striking self-defense kata. And it looked bad. And even like when I've watched like high level black belt professional French kata team people do it, you can kind of tell that was the last one that was being worked on, and it kind of looks like he didn't quite finish it, but they left it exactly the way that it was.
Well, at least there's two people. Like in my head, I pictured, much like we see with karate, somebody just kind of throwing strikes, and I was like, that would look so absurd if somebody's doing like some tuck unders and just pretending they're throwing somebody. So like that really relieves some. I was like, oh, that would be awful. But no, that actually makes perfect sense. That's more like a practice scenario that actually is effective and real, and not, I mean, look, I'm not trying to knock katas. It's just not for me. The other kind where it's just some guy looks like he's dancing and by himself and yelling. It's not for me, but I know there's practicality to all of it too as well.
Kata is how they kind of gave the system organization and structure where otherwise it wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, so like an acquaintance of mine, Mr. Snake Blocker, Sifu Sensei, Snake Blocker, discussed that what makes a martial art is it has to have like a hierarchy of ranking, and it has to have like a syllabus, like a minimum requirement. And if you take those things away, it's not really a martial art anymore, it's something else. And so like the way that like competitive judo schools work, like at least the way that I work, like I don't teach the katas. I could, but I don't have anybody that absolutely needs them right now. Like I teach people to win matches. And, it's kind of like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Most Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools do not have a syllabus. You rank up according to your efficiency on the mat. Judo would be more like wrestling or Sambo without the presence of the katas kind of canonizing these are the accepted techniques of judo. Mm-hmm. It would devolve into that, and like the traditional judo guys are probably all having like heart attacks right now listening to everything that I'm saying, if they're in fact like, how dare he? But it's the fact of the matter. You have competitive judoka, and then you have like traditional classic judoka, and we're not, our mindsets are very different. BJJ is, but that's why BJJ is the way it is. It descended from those kinds of judo, those kind of judoka. Mitsuya Maeda, Kan Kambi, was that kind of judoka. And so that got passed to the Gracies culturally, in how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of like progresses and ranks. There may be people that argue that, but I've also had these very long discussions with like Professor Joe and of course his instructor Francesco Mansour. So like I kind of know what the mindset was.
Well, yeah, and it goes back to before the podcast. Gary and I were talking about some books about jiu-jitsu, but some of the old stuff. I mean, like you said, it was Vale Tudo, right? You learned jiu-jitsu, and then you went and those guys challenged people and fought. It was a different thing, right? And now that is kind of evolved into all martial arts. Eventually, in America, kind of seem to go that route, right, where they kind of water down. But now it's like you might learn self-defense, but it wouldn't be what I'm thinking they're in there fighting Vale Tudo with other people, because those aren't the techniques I'm seeing. These are like somebody's grabbing your shirt, you're trying to get out, you're doing this and that. But yeah, it's evolved. Now you have just our version, right? Meaning our version of jiu-jitsu, just straight sport jiu-jitsu, meaning no strikes, no nothing. And again, that's what Elio was complaining about at the end. He's like, this is not what I invented. This is not what I envisioned. And it sounds like every martial arts, there's always a split, and people are kind of arguing over the direction that things go. I mean, that's kind of the common denominator with most of these things we're talking about.
Whose way's better? Who's more right? Who's closer to the root? Yes. I totally understand, and I have this debate on a variety of fronts with like all the different things that I'm involved with, because American Combat Jujitsu descends from Danzanryu, which is like that's the Hawaiian Jiu-Jitsu, and it was the first style taught in the United States. Like it came across turn of the century 1900s with a Japanese immigrant. And he was the first person to teach jiu-jitsu of any kind to Americans. And real interesting there, his name is Henry was his American name, Henry Okazaki, Shishiro Okazaki. And he had done no holds barred prize fighting. There's documentation of it.
Yeah.
Broke a guy's arm in what we now call an Americana, and like made the guy pass out from the pain. Like this was a guy that was like he was bullying Japanese people on the island, and he was like this big American, and Okazaki was big for a Japanese man. He was 200 pounds. And so Danzanryu had a history of prize fighting, and he had actually gone and done direct work with Kano back in the old country, back in Japan. But within Danzanryu, there's the old organization, and they were actually the first organization of their kind in the Western Hemisphere, the American Jiu-Jitsu Institute. They're a little more fair and balanced. They've got some more old school conservative martial arts types and some more modernized, like, liberal types. And then they had a split. So from them came two other organizations. There was Jiu-Jitsu America, which is more mainland, and they're based in California, and they're a lot more progressive in, like, allowing the styles to modernize and proliferate and change and incorporate new ideas. And they have a much stronger competition component to, like, their organization. And then there's another organization whose name I won't mention, that these guys are, like, wearing the hakama pants, and all of their boards are written in kanji, and, like, they memorize all the lists, and they believe that competition and especially guys like me are crass. We're barbaric. I mean, I've some of those old guys, like, have, pointed their finger at me and called me meathead before, so who's the I would argue that, like, if you really follow his esoteric principles as they were written, by continuing to modernize and proliferate while honoring your roots, those were his actual words. So time encapsulating it exactly the way it was upon the moment of his death. And there's a parallel here, because this has happened with judo as well. Time encapsulating it the way that it was upon the moment of his death was not what he wanted, but that's what they've done. And furthermore, Okazaki's boards were all in English. If you look at any photo of him in his school, his boards were in English. The only flag he ever displayed was the American flag, and half the time he was wearing a gi where the sleeves came up to here and the pants were cut off. He only wore hakama for formal pictures. These guys want to turn into, like, Edo era samurai crap. Call it Japanese jiu-jitsu. It's not. It's Hawaiian. But
yeah, it's interesting, because I think if I'd give some people the benefit of the doubt, right, it probably comes from a good place. They're like, let's preserve the tradition. But like you said, I mean, you put it beautifully. That's typically not what these people did when they created martial art. They want to evolve and change with time and keep fresh new ideals. And so I do see what they're saying, though. Like, they're right. I want to honor them, but kind of ironically, you're kind of not, right? And there's a beautiful way that you put it, because maybe if somebody look outside the box, they would say, oh, that is true. There's still a way we could honor the traditions and still kind of do something more progressive and new.
And with us, it's like, I will always discuss, like, Okazaki's place in, like, the brew that I teach. I will always, if there was a technique that was taught to me by a certain person and I'd never seen anybody teach it exactly that way, a lot of times we name it after the person that taught it to us. Like, so we find ways to honor people. I think that the most important component of what made Danzanryu what in current Danzanryu is the esoteric principles. And so if you're teaching the philosophy, like, there's jitsu and there's do, right? There's the technique, the art, and then there's the way, the spiritual path. And so if you're teaching the way, which is the esoteric principles, and you are creating student athletes and better people through the teaching of the jitsu, then you're on. And as long as you're not you can add, but you can't take away, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how we've done it. And so like incorporating the judo, that's kind of what he did. I believe that if the Gracies were around, by the time that if he was still alive and still, kind of pursuing the progression of his art when the Gracies came around, I imagine that Kano would have gone to visit the Gracies, or Okazaki, excuse me. Because like Hawaii was the port of call for everything. So everything came through Hawaii. So he was able to interface with all the martial arts coming to and from the mainland because it all came through the island. I imagine that he would have done that. So, you know, as when I got with Professor Maynard, and this kind of brings us back to a previous point about, you know, as American Combat Jiu-Jitsu, you're like a generalist. I enjoyed the mat work and I enjoyed throwing techniques. So I went really deep into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and eventually earned a black belt there. Did a lot of BJJ competition, both in the United States and abroad. And I really loved the throwing aspect. So I went really deep into the judo side. And for me, it's like when I don't even really look at back up. So like with Sambo can be viewed as an art unto itself, or it can be viewed as a competition platform where all these different stylists can come together and have an opportunity to play, and you're red or you're blue, right? So, you know, a black belt judoka could very well lock horns with an NCAA Division I All-American. Could very well lock horns with a pro MMA fighter, could very well lock horns with a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. You know, and you start to find out that rank doesn't really mean that much. You know, what matters is the person and how well they're putting it all together when they have to use all their skills. Combat Sambo and Sport Sambo are a way of doing that. So, you know, it all kind of blends, you know, and it's like, it's almost like Combat Sambo and American Combat Jiu-Jitsu are like, it's like the same thing, but one wears pants, and just, you know, just they kind of progress simultaneously on different sides of the world. So when they pursued Professor Maynard to become like the North American president, it was because they looked and see like, wow, he has essentially created the same thing remotely. It's like, because truth is truth, right? You know, so the only real difference is the language. So, you know, it's us from Russia to Hawaii to Japan to Brazil and back again, but you know, here we are. So
it's funny that you say stuff like that. As far as like the, you know, the lack of belts and the rank, we've kind of talked about it a bunch on here, and I know I say this all the time and I'm repeating myself, but I've always said that if you take, and we're just talking jiu-jitsu now, like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but if you take 30 guys and we all get into a room, regardless of belt color, we know where everybody lines up on the wall as far as like talent wise, competition wise at the end of the day. And sometimes those ranks, you know, the rank, your belt rank is an acknowledgement of your instructor in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It is not a testament of what that necessarily means in a fight. And right. It's hard for people to understand that. You know, I told my guys in Ohio before I left, you know, we would talk about it and I'd say, you know, we think we, you know, we train, and I've got, you know, we have striking classes, boxing, Muay Thai, and all that stuff up there too. We train and we prepare for fights, and we think we know what a fight is, but we don't really know what a fight is. Even going to competition, we don't know what a fight is. All we're trying to do is make ourselves as best prepared as possible. And
competition is the dress rehearsal.
Yes. And even that is not a real fight, you know, and it's hard for people to understand that, like, on the street, like, we don't clap hands. We don't agree to not poke each other in the eye. We don't agree to not bite. And nobody wraps my wrist before we go. You know, like, there's still some semblance of a training, like you said, dress rehearsal for the real thing, right? It's still kind of a training. And I really appreciate the fact that the rank is not celebrated, but the individual is. You know, I think there's something special about it. I'm sorry.
I was a white belt for 7 years. Yeah. And it was not until an instructor took me and said, okay, what I'm going to do with this is for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He says, what you do in competition is how I'm going to rank you to get you caught up. So if you can go win a blue belt division at a tournament, it has to be a tournament, not in the schoolhouse, you're a blue belt. And if you can, like, win multiple tournaments, that's where your stripes are going to come from. And then it's time for you to challenge up to purple. I was a white belt for 7 years. I didn't take my first actual Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu test until it was under Mario Alo Royler Gracie lineage as a brown belt. And then my black belt test under Joe took 3 days. That was 3 days of 8 hours a day. That was rough.
Yeah, I can imagine. Old school training too.
Yes, well, he's very old school.
Yeah. But, and that was kind of common. A lot of the stuff that you said earlier, it was like back in the day, it was hard to get ranked, right? There wasn't people around, and nobody knew exactly what they're doing. And then you kind of touched on it too. There's still a lot of people that don't know, right? Like because they don't have a curriculum, they don't have something they're going by, and maybe somebody's getting held back or left out for just a myriad of reasons that don't make sense. Gary and I run into people all the time. He's run into somebody recently, and same thing. I get messages all the time, like people, they just get lost. Like those scabby purple belt for 5 to 10 years, right? And it's because of some kind of politics somewhere, a blue belt somewhere, politics somewhere. And just like Gary said, it is the nice part. Like most of us, probably the 3 of us on here, we like our rank, right? It's nice to mention I have a black belt in this. It's nice to mention that stuff, and it does mean a lot. But also, I think a lot of us would show up to training regardless, right? And you're going to prove yourself in the tournament. You're going to prove yourself in the gym. And it is what the cool part is, like you said, in Samba, with celebrating the person, right? And so much not the rank. Because I think that is like, I know it's a pet peeve for mine where people just show up once I announce a belt test or this or that. Or when am I going to get my other belt? I'm like, well, it shouldn't work that. You shouldn't even have to ask me. It should go in the product of what you're doing. That's how I always looked at it. I mean, if that's the best guy in the room, then I go with the best guy in the room, and it's gonna just fall out how it does, right? It's a weird world we live in sometimes, and that's the mix of old and new, right? It's tough. And the new, equally, I've seen some people get ranked that don't deserve it as much, right? Now, again, that's my opinion. But I think we all see that, right? You see somebody get ranked on Instagram or Facebook, and you're like, "What? That person's only been training, blah blah blah." And I mean, it is a weird thing,
Because if you're old school, it took 15 years to get a black belt.
Yes, yeah.
Like a blue belt was 3 to 5 years, and now it's like you see guys that are getting blue belts in 18 months.
Yeah,
and so I mean, it's like if they've got the talent to back it up, I'm not going to begrudge it. Like I think that minimum time and grades are more for character development than anything. So if they have the maturity to back up that rank and the chops on the mat to back up that rank, like I personally am kind of over being butthurt about people that are able to like get a black belt in 5 years or whatever, as long as they have the talent to back it up. One of the things that happened, like within the Sambo community, is, we were talking about the Master of Sport. The Master of Sport in Sambo is a lot like the crew title in Muay Thai, to kind of give it some perspective. Master of Sport in the old country, like Europe, it's awarded based on your success as an athlete. And for a long time, it just was not being awarded in the United States. And we have athletes in the United States that more than deserved it. So what we started doing in lieu of like, yeah, I'm a Master of Sport in Sambo, was it kind of became a thing where all anybody cares about is what you've won. So like, your worthiness to be a coach would be like, well, I've medaled at the nationals X number of times and was on the Pan American team, and I've also got this judo or BJJ thing and this wrestling background, and that's what makes you a coach. So it became more about what the culture within Sambo within the United States became, is it became more about what you've won and where you've been. USA Sambo is in the process of reworking how they do that process. And then the historical body can award Master of Sport for national class, but not international class, because they're not the NGB. I have my Master of Sport for USA under All American Sambo Federation, the historical group, but I had to submit a packet for that. Like I said, here are my certificates, because they give you a certificate for anytime you medal at national level or above, like you have proof of everything that you've done now. So it's like I had to submit a copy of like all my certificates from like the national, international level. Here's my judo credentials, which they hold in very high regard. And here's my military stuff for going through the combatives program. I'm a master trainer for MACP because they hold that in very high regard because they're all old Russian Soviet military guys. So it says that you kind of have like the whole pie, you know, of what they can. And then that stuff had to go before a standards committee. And I had to meet the president in person. I had to meet Vitali in person before that discussion would even happen beyond it. So they still hold those, even though they're the only ones really awarding it, they hold that credential like with a death grip because they don't want just anybody having it. Like you have to have proven your mettle, you know. So like honorary promotions just don't happen in that regard. But even if you don't have a master of sport, like there are guys that do not have master of sport recognition that are insanely good athletes that have medaled internationally multiple times, won the nationals multiple times for combat and sport, Pan Am's, Worlds, Carlympia Cup, like all these. And I would still, even though like I have like the button in the certificate, I would say those guys are really a more qualified sambist than I am because their resume is denser and it's deeper. So like I was like, yeah, you're going to get better instruction from that person. So I mean that's the culture that we have within Sambo, and it's, I wish that to a degree that's a little more prevalent in judo because you have to earn the points for ranking as an athlete. But I wish that was more of a thing in BJJ than it is. But that's a personal want that may not be what's best for the masses. So take that with a grain of salt, you know.
Makes sense. Gary, do you want Gary's on a time limit here, so maybe you want to wrap it up a little bit, Gary, or am I just guessing?
Yeah, well, I was going to say we got about 5 minutes, and then I've got a couple things I got to go run and do. First of all, I want to say hopefully this is an abbreviated conversation that we can do again because I think you've been awesome.
Absolutely, love to.
Well, I love the history, and I love just it's new to me, but it's still related to combat sports, and you know. Early on,
an entire interview just to talk about one of those systems.
Right.
We're
well,
trying to bounce around between 3 continents right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and all of it is so attractive to me. We didn't even get to talk about the stuff that I know of and what, you know, of Sambo as far as like the athletes and the reason I have interest in Sambo. And that's a whole nother discussion. So I think we need to have you on again for that. I guess to wrap up, is there anything that you see right now that immediately can change to like boost, whether it be, you know, combat jujitsu, combat Sambo in the United States, and what can we do to get people to you?
The main thing is the visibility. People just need to, you know, like Fias has a great YouTube channel with like lots of footage and lots of highlights so that people can see exactly what it is. People established in things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just bringing an exhibition or two to their tournaments so that people can see what the Sambo format, be it combat or sport, looks like, even if it's not like full-fledged brackets. It's just, you know, I've made it really easy where you can have just your gi top and board shorts and wrestling shoes, and you can step on the mat for anything regional level or below. And, you know, we will welcome you. You don't have to drop the money on getting a full set of blue and a full set of red. And it's just consistency of events. So, anybody can, they can go to the Southeastern Sambo Association website, Facebook page, Facebook group, and find all of this stuff. But we've got the combined state championship coming up in November. That's in South Carolina. We have the 5-on-5 team meet, which anybody that wants to get a team together can be a part of this meet that'll go on in Tampa, Florida. We have the regionals occurring in January and here in Greensboro, North Carolina. And then we have the Virginia State Championship, and all these are open. Anybody can come, occurring in February in Roanoke. So and even if they just want to come and watch, so it's just getting the information out there. There's a lot of misunderstanding of what Sambo is. Like I don't know, I think they think that we like all neck crank the crap out of each other and wrestle bears and do nothing but heel hooks all the time. I don't know like what the perception is, but like Russian roid rage judo or something like this. But like when I hear through the grapevine like what people's perception of like me and my team is, it's like they kind of act like I'm the boogeyman, like I'm hiding under their bed and I'm going to heel hook them before they go to sleep or something. I don't know. Like, I promise I'm a nice person, Yeah, the training's stiffer just in the sense that like we're preparing, even our practice team, people that don't compete are being trained to the same level as everybody else. We treat everybody the same. So it's that combat readiness thing. Even if they're not going to fight in a tournament, they are prepared to defend themselves on the street. And we treat everybody equally, but we make it as safe as we can without compromising the integrity of the sport and the realism. So.
That's beautiful, man.
I
appreciate I appreciate you, Benjamin. Like I said, we got to have you back on and have another discussion, one where I don't have any time stipulations. So thank you so much for coming on. Like I said, I think this has been a great episode, and we definitely got to do it again.
Absolutely. I look forward to it, guys. Thank you so much. And, hope to see you. You're in my backyard. You can come visit me anytime.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to stop over. I got to come see you now.
Yeah, please do. You'll be my guest.
All right, brother. Guys, take it easy. Thanks, Butch.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.